The song we just sang, God's way is best for me. That's a nice song to sing. But when you're in an abusive marriage, what is the best way? How do you guide somebody in the best way? And there's likely different answers to that question. I am not suggesting there's only one way, and that's the right, there's only one right way. I think I mentioned it in the first topic. I'll say it again. Abuse in marriage, or marital abuse, is a complex and sometimes dangerous place. Therefore, it calls for biblical wisdom. It calls for biblical wisdom. Hopefully we'll see some of this throughout this topic here. So this title is Going the Direction of Addressing Abuse as a Church. This is some ideas, some suggestions. You're part of a church, I'm part of a church, to think about. And how could you, maybe you have some of these in your church already. Maybe your church that you're part of has seen into this and has taken steps and is maybe on the cutting edge of addressing some of these issues that are, I mentioned them as coming over the horizon, but remember I also said I'm kind of slow in catching on. I think we're over the horizon. I think we're out on the plains where it's, if you look around, if you listen, it's pretty prevalent. And when I say prevalent, please hear me. I'm not saying out there. I'm saying in Anabaptist settings. Addressing abuse as a church. So, in my limited experience, I've heard or observed the following. What did he or she do to provoke him or her? Most often it's, what did she do to provoke him? Now think beyond the obvious. You know what that's implying? If she wouldn't have, then he wouldn't have. Do you understand? That's a blame job. I'll say it as clearly as I can. Okay. Nobody causes somebody to abuse somebody else. There might be many factors in abuse, but causing to abuse somebody else, somebody doesn't cause somebody else to do it. Try to get that out of your belief system if you have it in there. Other things that I've heard. We don't want to choose sides. We don't want to choose sides when it comes to marital abuse, marriage abuse. Well, by virtue of not choosing sides, you've chosen sides. You've chosen a side. You've chosen not to do anything. That's by default, that's a choice. I know it's uncomfortable, I know it's not popular, but it's true. Let's wait and see what happens. Some things we can do that. Some things, it will exponentially get worse the longer you wait. And so time is of essence. We don't want to divide the church. understand that concept? That means keeping the church together, or at least outwardly together, is what's most important. That says something about values, what you treasure, if you will, what your guiding principles are, and what mine are as well. I'm not saying hastily make a decision. No, that's not wisdom either. If you're hasty in your decision, you'll jump from one frying pan into the fire. The church leaders decide that the couple needs to go for counseling and sends them to, you fill in the blank. So there's a report, or they know there's abuse here. So the leaders get together and decide, okay, they need help, and they're going. Brother Deacon, Brother John, you're responsible to communicate it. And so Brother John sends it. That means you text it. Or maybe delivers the message in person. We've decided you need to go. And so they get to this counseling place, wherever it is, and ask, okay, so what are you here for? Well, Brother Deacon, Brother John, the deacon, sent us. Or the church sent us. So what would you like? I don't know. What do you need? I don't know. Another approach, church leaders or appointed individuals meet with a couple to do one of a few things. A Bible study, go through a book on marriage, communication, anger, or three, they do the marriage counseling. Remember what I said earlier about the topic that Mark gave, and you try to apply good principles to something that's really broken. Like think of marriages as on a spectrum. Some are broken to a degree, and some are like really, really broken. Okay, so these over here that are somewhat broken, which all marriages are broken to one degree or another. Okay, so you can apply some of the principles that Mark talked about, and they're effective. But you try to apply those over here, and it's like they are ineffective. I mean, it's bleeding, and you're trying to apply a Band-Aid. Actually, here are the words of a lady. She said, "There are some days when I sincerely wonder if I should have left it all alone. Like actually brought this up, that there's abuse going on." Remember, she didn't know what it was. She didn't call it abuse the first day. There were many subsequent interactions until after a while she kind of put it together. This is abusive. There are days when I sincerely wonder if I should have left it all alone. There are some days my faith falters and I wonder if redemption is possible. I know God is in the redeeming business. The IS is capitalized. She also said, after bringing up the subject of separation to someone she trusted, one wife said, "I feel like I am handled just like my husband handles me. You bad girl for even considering separation. I feel like I am once again being offered a Tylenol, and here, if that doesn't work, try 3. You know when I read that? it kind of washed over me of what people in an abusive marriage, what it's like. Like, it doesn't matter what you say. You don't have a voice. You understand why her faith falters? And she wonders. So here again is abuse. Abuse flourishes in the shadows. And abusive individuals are adept at hiding it. Often they intuitively know it's unacceptable. Therefore they hide it. Abusers tend to wear masks. Do you know what a mask is? Projecting an image of themselves that they are really not. They have a private face and a public one, and those are often very different. Each of us, I hope, okay, I do. I realize I have a public face and I have a private face. I'm a private person and I'm a public person. But if those two persons are contradictory, I have to somehow learn how to navigate the two. Okay? And if I do that, something bad happens inside. We all have that capacity. Abusers have just exercised it to a large degree. And they don't know it. They don't see it. Okay, in some ways they know it, but they are blind to it. So we'll talk about just the two aspects of addressing it. Is one is addressing abuse as a church, talking about preventative measures and then redemptive measures. So on the side of the preventative measures, preventative measures are designed to safeguard against abuse. Safeguard. Not guarantees. There's no guarantees in this life. Given the prevalence of abuse, believers need to be aware of this, know what to look for, and address it in the early stages before it grows and develops. Think of abuse like a seed, like a child, okay, that grows from a child to an adult. Okay? So if you address abuse in the early stages, there's a chance it won't grow up into an adult. Like if you root it out as a small weed, that you don't have to root up this oak that's about 50 feet tall. That's the idea. Remember what I said? Preventative measures, estimates of abuse in marriage is about 25% among professing believers. I'm guessing there's around 50 people in here. How many would that be? How many could potentially, from that estimate, potential abusers? Out of 50 people, how many is that? About 10 years ago, a couple went to HPIN, Helping People in Need seminar. During one of the sessions, this couple walked out, left their name tags on the table, and said something to the effect, "We don't have to listen to this. We don't have anything like this in our church." 2 weeks later, a couple from their church had an interview at a counseling ministry. During the interview process, the interviewer brought the meeting to a close and advised them to go directly to the state police and report what they told them. Preventative measures will not take care of all potential abuse, but may significantly reduce occurrences. Even if one person is shielded from abuse due to preventative measures, it's worth it. So here's some ideas. This is not rocket science. Number one, preaching and teaching a biblical view of marriage and relationships. Preaching and teaching is a public and private ministry. Publicly proclaiming, publicly teaching, privately teaching, instructing. The biblical view is what the Bible says as a whole on the subject, taking into consideration the creation and the fall, progressive revelation, Old and New Testament, First and Second Covenant. Okay, all of those things need to be taken into consideration in this teaching about marriage. If you just take a piece of teaching from the Bible, you can go far off base. But if you take the subject as a whole and think about everything that the Bible teaches about this subject and take into consideration other things about the subject that relate to it, you will much less likely go off track and teach things that are erroneous or things that you just pick up from watching other couples. Church leaders, shepherds, should be at the forefront in modeling, preaching, and teaching this to their people. That's a leader's responsibility. Sound preaching and teaching is balanced. It avoids tangents or bandwagon thinking. For example, this is pretty common. We might not say it, but if you listen to some messages, it has this flavor. If only husbands would love. And that's it. If only husbands would love. Husbands, if you would just love, that would solve all the world's problems, or all the marriage problems, or all the parenting problems. Okay, the Bible does teach that. But the Bible teaches more than that. Or, now this is going to be a hobby horse. If only wives would submit. Wives, you need to submit. If you would only submit. The Bible does teach that. But the Bible teaches more than that. Do you realize that every person is under authority, and therefore every person has to submit? It's just a wife is in a particular context, and in that context, submission applies. But that's not the only thing a wife has to do. That's not the only thing that the Bible says about what a wife should do. And again, it's not a husband's responsibility to make his wife submit. It's not a wife's responsibility to make her husband love her. Or even those things, understanding like why should a husband love his wife? Or why should a wife submit to her husband? Like some of the rationale for it sometimes just stretches the human imagination. Like it's this idea, here's one idea that is so prevalent that it's almost nauseous. Like causes nausea is the idea of husbands should love their wives because their wives have some need. They have some need. And if they would just meet that need, their wives wouldn't have this trouble. Or the other side is a husband has a need for respect. He needs respect. If you don't respect him, he kind of loses his sense of who he is. Like he's not a man anymore if he doesn't have respect. Now, does the Bible talk about respect and love and submission? Yes. But often the rationale, how we get there, is upside down of what the Bible actually teaches. We have the right words, but our understanding is, I would say we are off. We are producing people that are very dependent on each other. And one of the results is God becomes a need meter. I need God to meet my needs, like not spiritual needs. We're not talking spiritual needs. We're talking about emotional needs. Like I have some emotional vacuum that I need God to fill. And that's why I'm struggling. And if God would just, what I actually need is just God to meet that need, and I'll be transported to another realm. And I won't have any more struggles. I'm saying preaching and teaching a biblical view of marriage would be a big preventative. I think in some ways we kind of teach something that it actually feeds abuse. I warned you it's going to be somewhat a tangent, or somewhat not a tangent, I hope, a hobby horse. But it's this idea of it needs correction. Parents, fathers particularly, modeling a biblical view of marriage to their children. Well, why fathers? Well, because fathers are delegated the greater responsibility. They are the head of the home. He is the head of the wife. That's what he's the head. That's what 1 Corinthians says. Husbands are delegated the leadership role in the marriage and the home. Because of this, husbands bear greater responsibility for the direction and the outcome of that marriage. Now, that does not mean all the responsibilities, not all the direction, not all the outcomes. It's just greater. And so that should sit with weight on a husband's shoulder. But not I've got to do this. No. Maybe think of, why did God give you this woman, this wife? Why did he take her from your side and not from your toes? Maybe so that she would be beside you to help you, like for you to work together. That's the idea. Being delegated leadership responsibility does not mean or imply that his wife is inferior to him, nor is he superior to her. A husband that views himself as superior to his wife or his wife as inferior to him is biblically misguided. Wives are delegated the support role in the marriage and home. Believing wives have significant influence, especially on unbelieving husbands. Also unbelieving husbands, by their beliefs, attitudes, outlooks, and behaviors. Children observe these things between their parents and are given an example of what God had in mind. They're getting a glimpse. Will it convert them? No, we're not talking about conversion. We're simply talking about a model that children see. Husbands need sound instruction, balanced views, and correction about their husbanding. And wives do too. That's what biblical preaching and teaching is about. By observing parents growing and maturing as believers, children learn valuable lessons about interpersonal relationships, not to mention transferable concepts of personal relationship with Christ and of Christ's relationship to his church. But those things are likely out in the future for them. They observe what we as parents do. Those things are preventative. Third, cultivating a culture of transparency and approachability. Okay, this one is a hard one. Transparency or openness with others about personal sins, and I mean sins. Like we all sin in many ways. About personal sins, struggles, and weaknesses are qualities that safeguard God's people from covering sin. So when we're open about them, we don't cover them. So by virtue of being open, by default, you're not covering. We're not covering. Asking for prayer, counsel, or seeking help from another individual is a preventative measure from hiding or from going from bad to worse. You know, we don't all of a sudden start into big sins. It usually is gradual. And if we would catch those things early on, it's preventative. Believers that are transparent with each other and engage each other walk out of darkness into light, do themselves and everyone around them a great service by addressing issues early rather than later. That's a lot easier said than done. Being approachable. What does that mean? Approachable simply means being humble. Being humble and doing a couple things in humility. One is inviting or welcoming input from others. Okay, asking for it, inviting it, and listening to corrections and concerns. It is much easier for my wife or my children to talk to me about how I conduct myself when I invite them to share with me or give their perspective. There are many wives that would be afraid to open their mouth to their husbands. And in some cases, understanding a little bit of the situation, I would be too. By asking for their input and listening to their perspective, I am paving the way for them to point out issues to me that I may not be aware of. I can also address issues in the early stages of development. You know, God understands. He knew what he was saying when he said, be humble, be approachable. When people have concerns, invite them. He knows what he's talking about. We are a great danger to ourselves because we deceive ourselves into thinking, I've got it together. But if we would practice this, this would be a preventative for abuse. Because you could see some things and you could address them early on. When you see how a husband talks to his wife, how a wife responds to her husband, imagine if you had that kind of a relationship where you'd be invited to speak into it. Provide an avenue for addressing differences and conflict in marriage. Providing safe places where couples can openly acknowledge that they have differences without being looked down on or ashamed encourages their people to walk in the light. You know, men and women are different. Husbands and wives are different. Sometimes it's kind of shameful to admit that my wife is different than I am. Or for couples to talk about, like ladies to talk about with each other about, I'm different than my husband. You are. Oh. When my husband says jump on the way up, I ask how high. Now, sometimes we present it as heaven. And marriages on earth are not heaven. Be realistic. Be realistic. There are differences, and often people have conflict. Give people the opportunity to actually talk about the conflict. Make it a culture like that. Churches that provide help or encourage couples to seek help for differences or conflicts that they are unable to resolve on their own create a culture where abuse cannot flourish. When it's degraded, like that you have differences or that you have conflict, you're actually feeding the idea of abuse. Do preventative measures. The last one, a preventative measure. Establish an abuse policy before it happens. With the prevalence of abuse, it is wise to consider whether churches should have an abuse policy in place before it happens. What is the value of an abuse policy? Here are some ideas. First, it establishes and communicates what the church stands for or against. We stand for this. Doing this informs and hopefully gets everyone on the same page on the issue. It's no different than your guidelines that many churches already have. It's the same idea. It's just one of those things that has some bite in it. And there's lots of value in it. So it's simply stating it communicates what the church stands for. Secondly, it safeguards. Spelling out consequences for violators is a deterrent. I mentioned that earlier. I also said safeguards don't change anyone. They're not intended to. The law in the Old Testament did not change anyone. It simply said, here's the line, don't cross it. Do you know what that did in some people? That's there, I'm going to cross it. Well, that's in us. It just shows us our sin nature. You put up a guideline, I will violate it. But if you know there are consequences for violating it, it'll cause you to think twice or thrice or not act at all. Does it change you? No. But it's a deterrent. And deterrents are significant when it comes to abuse. Number 3, the value of an abuse policy. It provides an avenue of relief and possibly escape for the vulnerable. If you have an abuse policy, it gives the people that are vulnerable a way out, a way to address it. So part of the policy should include who they will talk to or where they can make it known that they're in an abusive context. Even if it's not abuse per se, a well-developed policy gives vulnerable individuals a voice to express their concerns or what they are experiencing even before it becomes abusive. Number 4, it avoids crucial missteps when many important decisions need to be made simultaneously. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to make many decisions and every decision is weighty, everywhere you step in making a decision is a landmine. If you don't step right, it'll blow up. If you've ever been there, this makes a lot of sense. If you can do this when you're not in the heat of a lot of decisions, you will make a lot better decisions. We don't usually make the best decisions when we're hot. You know what I mean when we're hot, like when we're upset, when there's a lot of things flying around. Okay, We do better when we're calm, when we're able to discuss things from different angles. So this is the idea. It avoids crucial missteps when you have to make many decisions and important decisions in the moment. If you can do that beforehand, it'll be a better policy. And a policy doesn't have to be written in stone. A policy can be written and then added to or revised or whatever. But that's the idea. Lastly, when abuse is uncovered, energies can be directed to areas of greatest need. So back to the other point, if you have to address an abuse issue and you don't have the things in place, guess where your energies are going to go? We got to do something. What do we need to do? And you know what falls through the cracks? The people. And those people actually need your energies mostly then. With an abuse policy. If you establish that, if you're aware of it, you can encourage and support individuals in equipping themselves to help before abuse happens. Those individuals become your care team or the go-to persons when abuse happens in your church. Well, it's not going to happen in my church. So, shifting to redemptive measures. Redemptive. If preventive doesn't prevent it, and I guarantee you, they won't, not completely. There are some that will get passed. So, redemptive measures. Develop a safety plan. One. I'm just looking at my time. So here's some ideas. What is a safety plan first? So remember earlier in the first topic I said the safety of the victim is a priority. And especially in situations where it's dangerous. And sometimes you don't know the danger. And that's why you need to prioritize the safety of the person, because there's many things you don't know. So here's some ideas. FocusMinistries1.org is one suggestion that has a safety plan. Is It Abuse by Darby Strickland also has a plan. Chris Moles, the book that Brian mentioned, I think he has a plan. So there's different plans. It's simply getting things together that if you need to leave, you have the important things that you need to exit on short notice. Prioritize the safety of the victim because the violation has been perpetrated on them and against them. For example, if a victim feels unsafe being alone with the perpetrator, safety should be provided. They should include living separately, sleeping separately, or not talking when they are by themselves. Those are simple, basic guidelines for safety. Separating a married couple, even in the same house separation when it involves abuse, is a controversial subject, especially in some religious settings and for various reasons. Now I realize I might be stepping on a hot potato. So I'm not for divorce. I'm not an advocate for divorce, but I am an advocate for the safety of people. If they are being abused, it needs to stop. And if separation is required, then separation is required. So here are some arguments that people would sometimes use. It's almost like marriage is the ultimate standard. Like that's the holy grail of life. Marriage and keeping it, staying together. And I'm saying that the Bible teaches that, But that's not all that the Bible teaches. So here's how it's presented. Marriage is for life, for better or for worse, till death do us part. Some would argue, since you promised this, doing otherwise would be breaking your promise. Jesus said, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Matthew 19, verse 6, and Mark 10, 9. Some would argue to leave a marriage under any circumstance would be violating what Jesus taught. That is, if you have to suffer, you have to suffer. Just bear up under it. There's verses that should help you in your suffering. 1 Peter, 2 Peter, James, those are verses that would support the idea. Peter wrote, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, even unbelievers, they may be won without the word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2. Some would argue that Peter instructs wife to remain and be a godly witness. Leaving your husband violates that principle. These and many other passages emphasize certain aspects of marriage. In some settings, the highest ideal for the married believer is to remain married for better or for worse, even if the worse means enduring abuse and or endangering your physical life. When it comes to the subject of abuse in marriage, I am personally of the persuasion that it is permissible to flee danger or potential harm to yourself or your children. Separating from an abusive spouse and even remaining separated is permissible. While it is not always possible to flee danger, it is an appropriate and reasonable response to do so when possible. Does that mean it's required? No, I do not view it as a requirement, but I view it as a wisdom matter. For various reasons, one person may decide to flee, while another may decide to stay. My concern is this: a husband or wife should not be required to remain in an abusive relationship with his or her spouse, nor should we require an abuse victim to leave. They need help to discern that, and we should help them discern that. I recall counseling a married woman over a period of at least a year that was part of a church that would counsel her against leaving her abusive husband. She was welcome to meet with the pastor and his wife when she felt she needed to, but leaving was not an option except when it was deemed too dangerous. She was allowed to leave for a short duration, but usually within a day or two, she was required to return. In this case, the woman was herself of the same persuasion as her church about remaining with her abusive husband. Personally, I think these are small steps in the right direction, but inadequate or incomplete. And in that particular case, if I remember right, it involved a firearm. So if that adds anything to it or detracts from it, that may help you. For me, that is dangerous. Now, I realize you have to wade through a number of things if you're part of a church, but I gave you my perspective. So developing a safety plan is part of this, being ready to flee if need be. Secondly, as a church, confronting the perpetrator. Confronting the perpetrator should be done with consent of the victim, because confronting, and when I say confronting, I don't know what image you get, but when I say confronting, I mean simply having a normal conversation like I would have with any other person. When confronting a perpetrator, you have to keep things in mind. One, it may escalate the abuse, meaning it'll get worse. Secondly, by escalating the abuse, it may increase the danger for the victim. Thirdly, the abuser may simply change strategy. That is the way that they abuse. Or they may tone down abuse for a time. Like they might stop it for a time. But remember, I said earlier, from statistics, few abusers change. Now, I'm saying when they're bona fide abusers, like when they really abuse. Like, I realize there can be a spectrum of abuse. But I'm saying when they're abusers, few change. I read one statistic, 1 in 10. But if you understand the requirements for change, it is high. Like the standard is high. And often they don't want to submit to that. So confronting the perpetrator should be done with consent of the victim. And I'm not talking about consent from the victim if you're reporting it to authorities. Okay, you can let the victim know, but after you report it. Some things you need to directly report. Confronting is first about what was said or done. So, what did the perpetrator say or do? Sometimes I've interacted with men and confronted them about some things that they did. And their comeback was, well, I didn't intend to. Well, we're not talking about what you intended to. We're simply first establishing what did you do. Once we establish what you did, then we can talk about intent. You understand the difference? So what did you do? I want a complete story. I want the complete, and often that takes some time to get from a person. Confronting someone should be done in a respectful and loving manner. Remember, they're a human being. They should be treated respectfully. This is not a time to get in their face and yell at them and slam the You understand? If you do things like that, you're simply doing what they do. You're lowering yourself to being abusive. Firm? Serious? Yes. But not resorting to wrong methods. The person remains an image bearer of God. Twisted? Very much so. Corrupted? Yes. But still an image bearer. Just like you and me. Treat them that way. Reflect the image of God to them. Avoid threats or promises. Ask open-ended questions that give opportunity for disclosure. Let them tell you. Don't necessarily tell them what you know. They know how to toe the line. They know how to say the right things. Who told you that? Where did you learn that? Sometimes they'll say things like, I'm not an abuser. Well, what makes you think that, why do you say that? Well, she says I'm an abuser. So I did not hear her say that. Well, she implied that. Yeah. You heard it that way, but I didn't hear it that way. So what have you done? Well, I'm not an abuser. Perpetrator should disclose what he or she did. Get them to tell you. If the spouse has to tell you, the spouse could be in trouble. Sometimes the spouse will tell you, wants to tell you. They want to get it on the table. Sometimes the spouse is, I don't know if I should tell you or not. If I tell you, I'm going to get it. So, protect the spouse, the victim. I would advise you to keep records of interactions. Stories change. People's recollections change. My recollections change. But it's amazing when I write things down and I come back to it a month or two later, it's like I wrote down verbatim, and what was said over here is a different storyline. Write it down. Perpetrators are good at weaving stories and take you on a bunny trail. Get a storyline. Try to get it down. So keep records of interactions. Many puzzle pieces take time to organize and assemble. It does. It's not rocket science. It's just simply you're taking different pieces of a puzzle and trying to put them together accurately. Involve appropriate authorities. In certain cases of abuse, reporting to civil authorities is mandatory. Minors under the age of 18 years of age, handicapped or elderly, if they are abused, it's mandatory to report it. And it's appropriate to do so. You might feel bad, you might feel torn up, it might be a lot of consequences. That's secondary. Involving appropriate authorities when abuse is discovered is sometimes the best first step to avoid missteps. Let them, if it's certain things, report it, let them sort it out. You don't have to do that. That's actually not, in many cases, not your responsibility. Not yours nor mine. Don't overlook informing the victim if you report or are aware of it being reported to civil authorities. That can be just as dangerous. If it's reported to authorities, victims can be in danger because they let it out, or it's assumed they let it out. So look out for their safety. Exercise church discipline. As a church can do this. And in some cases should. So church discipline should be exercised toward the unrepentant, those who persist in sin. Perpetrators that minimize, blame, make excuses, justify, or a variety of other things, other sins, are candidates for excommunication. In many ways, a perpetrator is blind to what they're doing. Some they know what they're doing. Some are just, I'm not saying just blind, I'm saying they are seriously blind. They have ways of explaining what they're doing. Church discipline should be exercised by the local church. It is the unified voice of the local body of Christ. It is an expression and application of faith, love, and obedience. It is not to be used as a threat or manipulation to simply have the person conform their behavior. Yes, you want the abuse to stop, but some other things need to be addressed as well. The heart behind that. So some of the evaluative questions for an abuser. Is the perpetrator of abuse able to do the following? State specifically what he did, both in big and small ways, against his or her spouse. If the person is not able to do that, they do not know what they need to repent of. Secondly, can they identify the hard issues the corrupted perceptions, their beliefs, their misunderstandings about why they do that. Can they get to the heart of that? Thirdly, about responsibility. Do they take full responsibility for the harm caused? And fourthly, do they accept the consequences for that? Like, consequences may mean you need to move out and you are not allowed to move back in until, maybe never. But for now, you need to move out. Those are the consequences. And it does not mean your spouse hasn't forgiven you. That doesn't mean anything like that. Separate forgiveness from consequences. Manipulators often know their Bibles well, but they have a different Bible, a different understanding of the Bible than you and I do. Lastly is working together. Working together as a church in cases of abuse is a significant challenge. There are often polarizing or extreme views in a local church. On the pole, polarizing is two poles, okay, and many in between. So on the one end is forgive and forget. If he or she would only, then he or she would not. The other pole is lock him or her up, kick him or her out, give him or her what she gives to the others so they can see what it tastes like. You know, it used to be, when I was younger, the common phrase was, if a couple is having conflict, put them in a room, lock the door, they'll work it out. I would say at this point, if you do that, somebody's going to die. That is dangerous. I would not advise that. When it comes to the subject of abuse, believers are often, one, naive. Naive or uninformed of the depth of corruption of the human heart. I think we've often bought into this idea that we're good people, we just kind of got started on the wrong track. I'm not saying that getting on the wrong track has no influence, but I'm saying the corruption in the human heart runs to the bones, if you will, runs to the DNA, and it is bad. Don't be naive. Believers are often trusting. They accept at face value what people say in spite of contradictions. Believers are often black and white in thinking. It's either right or it's wrong. There's no gray. Believers are often critical or hard-hearted. They lack a genuine compassion for victim and perpetrator. So, in working together, here's an idea. I'm suggesting you utilize your care team or people equipped for the task. So a team might consist of the following. You have a 3-member team. That's just an idea. You can develop it, work it in somehow. So one is a spokesperson. A spokesperson, this person speaks on behalf of the team. The spokesperson oversees the team and communicates to the pastor or pastoral team or communicates directly to the congregation. That's a pretty big role for a spokesperson, but that's just the idea. Secondly, you have a victim advocate. This person speaks on behalf of the victim and relays messages to and from the victim. This person might personally help the victim or might interact with the counselor who counsels the victim. The victim advocate relays progressive reports to the team's spokesperson. Understand, these 3 people are crucial in their interaction. Third person is the perpetrator advocate. This person speaks on behalf of the abuser. The abuser is accountable to this person and is called to account by this person. The abuser's advocate might counsel him, but not necessarily. This counselor would give updates and reports to the person. So if the perpetrator goes to another place for counseling, to another person or another place, then this counseling place or counselor would communicate to the perpetrator advocate. So the counselor would give updates and reports to the perpetrator advocate, and the perpetrator advocate relays progress or relapse reports to the team's spokesperson. This team must work together closely. It is only reasonable that they are informed to some extent about what constitutes abuse and what the effects are on the victim and the perpetrator. The care team methods and goals must align as well. Their goal is not primarily reunification, getting this couple back together, but conforming to the image of Christ. In closing, I remember interacting with a lady that separated from her husband, and I wasn't sure if it was with church consent or not. But anyway, it was a legal matter because he had sexually violated the children, he had sexually violated her, and the church was torn up whether or not she should leave. Well, she left. And then the pressure was on her you need to get back with him. And I interacted with her for some time. And one of the things that would come up regularly is this sense of they're talking about reunification. I need to get back with him. And she talked about having panic attacks. The man had not made any acknowledgement. He had moved away, actually. Made changes? No. Slander his wife? Yes. Turned the children against her? Yes. Tried to get the children away from her? Yes. The church emphasized the reunification. The lady about came apart just thinking about getting back together with him. We sang the song, we want what's best. Sometimes the best is a hard road. So as you try to help people, especially in abusive cases, remember your role. You're an instrument in the hand of God. You cannot change anyone, and I can't either. But you can be an instrument to point people in the right direction and to provide safety for some, and some to report them to the right places. This is a challenging work in working with abusive marriages. But the Church of Christ has had to deal with all kinds of things throughout her history. And this is one other one. And so in 50 years, when you'll be off the scene and I'll be off the scene, and your children and my children or our grandchildren will read and listen to what we said, what will they say? God give you wisdom, courage, and grace to be God's instrument.